A mafia boss entered his abandoned lake house and found a woman living inside. She grabbed a knife and told him to get out. He couldn't move. What she didn't know, the stranger she was threatening was her own husband, and he had spent 6 years believing she was dead. The alert came at 11:47 p.m. Ethan Cole was sitting in the back of his armored SUV when his phone buzzed, a single red notification from the security system of a property he hadn't visited in 6 years. Most men would have sent someone else. Ethan Cole was not most men. "Turn around," he told his driver. "Lake house." No explanation, none was ever needed. The house sat at the edge of Black Pine Lake, 2 hours north of Manhattan, buried behind trees so old they blocked out the moon. Ethan had bought it the year he got married, back when he still believed certain things about himself, that he could keep the two halves of his life from touching, that love could exist in a clean, separate room from everything else he was. He hadn't been back since the funeral. There had been no body to bury. The car had gone off Route 9 and into the river during a rainstorm. By the time divers found the wreck 3 days later, the current had taken everything. The coroner declared Emily Cole legally dead based on blood evidence and the impossibility of survival. Ethan had stood at an empty grave and felt something close inside him. Permanently. Now the gravel crunched under his tires as the SUV rolled to a stop 50 meters from the front gate. Ethan stepped out alone. He held up a hand to stop his men. "Stay here." "Sir, stay." He walked to the house with a gun in his right hand and nothing else. No flashlight. He didn't need one. He knew every inch of this place from memory. The loose third porch step, the way the front door stuck in winter unless you lifted the handle slightly, the long hallway that smelled like cedar and lake water no matter what season it was. He lifted the handle. The door opened. The smell hit him first. Cedar and lake water. He stood in the dark hallway for a moment and just breathed. Something moved in his chest that he immediately pressed back down. He was not here to feel things. He was here because someone had tripped his sensor, and whoever it was would deeply regret it. He moved through the living room. Dust covers over the furniture, cobwebs in the corners. But there, on the floor by the couch, a small canvas backpack. Worn straps, a water bottle tucked in the side pocket. Someone was living here. He heard it then, a sound from the kitchen, the soft clink of a glass being set down. Ethan crossed the hallway in 4 silent steps and pushed open the kitchen door. The woman standing at the counter spun around so fast she knocked the glass into the sink. For 1/2 second, she just stared at him, eyes wide, chest heaving, and Ethan's brain refused to process what it was seeing. She had shorter hair now. She was thinner. There was a pale scar running from her left temple toward her ear that hadn't been there before. But her face. God, her face. "Emily." The word came out of him like something had punched it loose. She didn't say his name back. She grabbed the knife from the drying rack beside the sink and pointed it at him with both hands shaking. "Get out." Her voice was low and terrified. "Get out right now or I'll scream." "Emily." "I don't know you!" She pressed herself against the counter, the knife between them. "I don't know who you are! Get away from me!" Ethan lowered the gun slowly. His hand wasn't steady. He noticed that, as if from a distance, his hand, the one that had never once trembled holding a weapon in 20 years, was not steady. "Put the knife down," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You're holding a gun!" "I put it away." He slid it into his jacket. "Look, it's gone." He raised both hands, open palms. "Emily, I need you to look at me. Look at my face." She was looking. Her eyes moved across his features with the frantic calculation of someone trying to find a threat, not recognition. There was no warmth in her expression, no confusion softened by familiarity, just naked fear and the desperate grip of a woman who had learned to protect herself. "I don't know you," she said again, but this time it came out quieter, almost like a question. My name is Ethan Cole. His voice broke on the last word, and he hated himself for it. This is my house, and you— He stopped, started again. You are my wife. The knife didn't lower. That's insane, she whispered. I know how it sounds. Your wife is dead. 3 words, said so plainly, so matter-of-factly, that they landed like a physical blow. Your wife is dead. She had said it the way you'd correct a stranger's wrong turn, without cruelty, without drama, just fact. Ethan stared at the woman standing 6 feet in front of him, the woman he had buried in an empty grave, the woman whose ghost had followed him through 6 years of violence and silence and carefully constructed numbness, and felt the entire architecture of his grief shift under his feet like something geological. She didn't know him. She genuinely, completely did not know who he was. This wasn't a performance. He had spent his adult life reading people, liars, actors, men performing courage when they were drowning in fear. He knew every tell, every micro-expression, every breath that came 1 beat too late. Emily Cole was not pretending. She was terrified of him, and she had absolutely no idea why. She was alive. She had been alive for 6 years, and she was looking at him like he was a stranger who had broken into her home. Ethan Cole, a man who had faced down 3 federal investigations, survived 2 assassination attempts, and never once in his adult life not known what to do next, stood in his own kitchen and had no idea what to do next. So he did the only thing he could think of. He sat down on the kitchen floor, back against the wall, hands still raised, and said, I'm not leaving, but I won't come closer. Just, please don't run. She stared at him for a long moment. She didn't run, but she didn't put the knife down either. Nobody moved for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. The lake made its quiet sounds outside. Water against rock, wind through pine. The knife in Emily's hand caught the thin light coming through the window and held it like a warning. Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the wall and watched her the way you watch something you're terrified of losing again. He didn't speak. He had learned a long time ago that silence, used correctly, was more disarming than anything you could say. After 4 full minutes, he counted, her grip on the knife loosened slightly. Why are you sitting on the floor? She asked. Because you're scared of me, and you should have at least one advantage in the room. She blinked. That wasn't the answer she'd expected. What do you want? She said. Right now? For you to hear me out. He kept his voice flat, careful. 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll leave and send someone else to talk to you. Someone less— He glanced down at himself. Overwhelming. Emily's jaw tightened. She was calculating, he could see it, weighing the distance to the back door against the size of him, measuring his stillness for deception. She was smarter than her fear was letting her act, and some part of him recognized that immediately. She was always the smartest person in every room. That hadn't changed. 5 minutes, she said finally. Talk from there. Okay. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket. She flinched and raised the knife again. Phone, he said. Just my phone. He held it up so she could see it, then turned the screen toward her. The lock screen photo was the 2 of them on a sailing boat off the coast of Maine. Summer light, her head thrown back laughing, his arm around her shoulder, his expression softer than he ever let it be anywhere else. Emily stared at it. Nothing happened on her face. That photo is 6 years old, Ethan said. You were 31. We rented a boat for a week and you got seasick on day 2 and complained about it every single day, but refused to go back to shore because— His voice caught briefly. He pushed through it. Because you said losing was worse than suffering. Silence. I don't remember that, Emily said. I know. I don't remember any boat. I don't remember— She stopped, looked at the photo again. I don't recognize her. Her, not me. Her. Something cold moved through Ethan's chest. She wasn't saying she didn't recognize him. She was saying she didn't recognize herself. He unlocked the phone and pulled up the Photos app. 3 years of their life, meticulously kept by a man who had never been sentimental about anything else. Their wedding at a small vineyard in Tuscany. Emily in a simple ivory dress, no veil, flowers in her hair. Both of them looking at each other with the particular expression of people who cannot believe their own luck. Christmas mornings, a birthday dinner at that Italian place on West 46th she loved. A video he'd taken without her knowing, of her dancing badly in their kitchen to a song on the radio, laughing at herself. He walked across the kitchen slowly, watching her hand on the knife, and set the phone on the counter between them where she could reach it. Then he stepped back to his spot against the wall.
"Look through them," he said. "Take as long as you want." Emily approached the phone the way you'd approach something that might bite. She picked it up with one hand, kept the knife in the other, started scrolling. Ethan watched her face. He had imagined many impossible things over the years. Grief does that, tears holes in your logic that let absurd fantasies leak through. He had imagined her walking through his office door, had imagined a phone call, had, in the very darkest moments he'd never admitted to anyone, imagined exactly this, finding her alive somewhere, showing her their life, watching her remember. In every version of that fantasy, her face had done something the moment she saw the photos, cracked open, flooded with recognition. She had always reached for him. The woman standing at his kitchen counter scrolled through their wedding photos with the quiet, detached expression of someone looking at a stranger's vacation pictures. "She looks happy," Emily said quietly. Ethan said nothing. "In all of them." She scrolled slowly, stopped on the kitchen video, watched herself dancing. "She looks like she had a very good life." "She did," Ethan said. "We both did." Emily set the phone down. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, her expression shifted from fear to something more complicated. Not recognition, not even close, but something. "This could be fabricated," she said. "I know. Photos can be edited. Videos can be made. People do this. I've read about it." She was steadying herself, he could tell, building logic like a wall against something that was threatening to overwhelm her. "Obsessed people. Stalkers. People who—" "Emily, don't call me that." The words landed hard. "What do you call yourself?" he asked. A pause. "Claire. My name is Claire." Claire. Someone had given her a new name, and she'd worn it long enough that it fit. He filed that away and kept his face neutral. "Okay," he said. "Claire, look at the scar on your left temple." Her hand moved involuntarily to the side of her face. "Do you know how you got it?" Silence. "The doctors who treated me said a car accident," she said slowly, "before I was found. They said I had severe head trauma and that was why I couldn't—" She stopped. "Couldn't remember." "Yes. It was a car accident," Ethan said. "Route 9, 6 years ago during a rainstorm. The car went into the river. I identified what was left of the vehicle. I was told you were dead." He let that sit for a moment. "I believed it." Emily watched him. The knife was at her side now, not raised, though her knuckles were still white around the handle. "If what you're saying is true," she said carefully, "then why didn't anyone find me? Why didn't you find me?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to." "And if I say I don't believe you?" "Then you don't believe me," Ethan said. "But I'm still not leaving you alone in this house. There are people in my world who are not good, and if any of them find out you're alive before I understand what happened—" He stopped himself. He was giving her too much, too fast. He could see her shutting down, the fear sharpening again behind her eyes. "I'm trying to help you," he said simply. "You broke into my house with a gun." "This is my house." "It was abandoned." "I know." Another silence. Longer this time. Emily set the knife on the counter, not putting it away, just setting it down, and crossed her arms. "You looked at those photos," she said quietly, "and you were about to cry." Ethan said nothing. "Men like you," she studied him, "whatever you are, men like you don't cry over photos of strangers." It was the most perceptive thing anyone had said to him in years. "No," he agreed, "they don't." Emily uncrossed her arms. She looked at the phone still lying on the counter, then back at him. Something moved behind her eyes that she didn't seem to fully understand herself. "There's a couch in the living room," she said finally. "If you're staying, you're sleeping there. And I'm keeping the knife." Ethan nodded slowly. "And in the morning," she added, her voice firm, "you're going to tell me everything." "In the morning," he agreed. "I'm going to find someone who already knows everything." She didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat on the sheet-covered couch in the living room, jacket still on, and listened to the house, to the lake outside, to the occasional creak of floorboards from the bedroom down the hall where Claire, had locked herself in with a kitchen knife and whatever fragile sense of safety she'd managed to build in a life she couldn't remember. At 4 a.m., he made 2 calls. The first was to Marco, his head of security. Short, clipped instructions. No names, no details. A car to the lake house by 6 a.m. Emily would be brought to the Brooklyn safe house without knowing exactly where she was going. Make it comfortable. Make it feel like a choice. The second call took longer to connect. A number he had memorized 6 years ago and never dialed. He'd found it during his own private investigation in the weeks after Emily's death, back when grief and fury were indistinguishable, and he'd turned over every stone within reach looking for someone to blame. The number belonged to a private neurological practice on East 68th Street. The name attached to it, Dr. Raymond Harris. At the time, Ethan's investigator had flagged Harris as one of 3 physicians called to the scene of the Route 9 accident before official emergency services arrived. The detail had seemed strange, but ultimately led nowhere. The investigation stalled. Life, or what passed for it, moved on. The call rang 7 times. No answer. He tried again at 5 a.m. Same result. By the time the car arrived, Emily had emerged from the bedroom with her canvas backpack, her knife tucked visibly into the side pocket like a statement. She looked like she'd slept as little as he had. There were shadows under her eyes, but her gaze was sharp, and she'd made some internal decision overnight that showed in the set of her jaw. She was going to cooperate. Cautiously. On her terms. He respected that more than he could say. She didn't speak during the 2-hour drive back to the city. She sat on the opposite side of the back seat and watched the highway through the window, and Ethan gave her the silence she needed. He spent the drive working his phone, pulling threads. By the time Manhattan appeared on the horizon, he had what he needed. Dr. Raymond Harris was not at his practice on East 68th Street because Dr. Raymond Harris had died 11 days ago. Cardiac arrest, quiet funeral, no immediate family. His practice had been closed for 3 years, retirement, and his estate was being handled by a law firm in Midtown. 11 days ago. Ethan stared at that detail for a long time. Emily had been found at the lake house, alone, evidently living there for some period of time. Dr. Harris had died 11 days ago. The timeline fit with unsettling precision. Whoever had been keeping Emily hidden, whatever structure had been built around her life as Claire, it had collapsed the moment Harris died. And somehow, with no map and no memory, she had drifted back to the last place some buried part of her still knew. He needed to get inside Harris's clinic records. The clinic was a narrow brownstone squeezed between a dental office and a dry cleaner on East 68th. The front was locked, a paper notice taped inside the glass. Practice permanently closed. For inquiries, contact, with the Midtown law firm's number printed below. Ethan didn't call the law firm. He had Marco's team inside the building in under 20 minutes. The records room was in the basement, filing cabinets mostly cleared out, the digital system wiped or transferred. But Harris had been old school in ways that turned out to be fortunate. A locked drawer in his private office, the kind of drawer that exists specifically to hold the things a man cannot put anywhere official, gave up its contents quickly. Inside, a single manila folder, no label on the tab. Ethan opened it and read it standing at the dead man's desk. Emily Cole. The name was written in Harris's handwriting at the top of the first page. Below it, 6 years of careful, private medical notes. Ethan read slowly, which was not his nature. He made himself read every word. Emily had been pulled from the river the night of the accident by a man who lived along that stretch of Route 9. A retired fisherman who'd seen the car go off the road and gone in after her before emergency services were called. By the time paramedics arrived, the fisherman had carried her up to his truck. Harris had been contacted, not officially, not through any emergency channel, but through a private number that Ethan recognized immediately as belonging to a man named Victor Reese. Victor Reese, an old associate, a man who had known both Ethan and Emily, a man who had died in a boating accident 2 years after Emily's supposed death, a fact Ethan had filed away at the time as coincidence. It was not coincidence. Harris's notes laid it out with the careful precision of a man documenting something he knew would matter someday. Emily had survived the crash with a severe traumatic brain injury, a bilateral contusion that had destroyed the hippocampal structures responsible for long-term memory. She had no recollection of her name, her history, her marriage. She could speak, she could reason, she could build new memories from the moment she woke up in Harris's private care facility in Connecticut. But everything before that night was simply gone. Victor Reese had made the call to hide her. She cannot go back to him, Harris had written, apparently quoting Reese directly. The moment Ethan knows she's alive, every enemy he has will know within a week. She'll be leverage. She'll be a target. The only way to keep her safe is for her to stay dead. Ethan stood completely still. He read the sentence 3 more times. The only way to keep her safe is for her to stay dead. He thought about the 6 years, the empty grave, the way the grief had calcified inside him into something he'd simply built his life around, the way you build a house around a load-bearing wall you've stopped noticing. He thought about every decision he'd made in that time, harder, colder, more ruthless, because the one person who had made him capable of softness was gone. She hadn't been gone. She had been an hour outside the city in a Connecticut facility, learning to walk through a life with no past, while the people who loved her decided it was safer that way. He closed the folder. There was one final note, dated 8 months ago, Harris's handwriting shakier by then, the letters less precise. She has been stable and safe for years. I am not well. I have made arrangements for her care to continue, but I fear arrangements are not the same as people. If something happens to me before I find someone worthy of this trust, I don't know what becomes of her. She deserves to know who she is. I have always believed that. I was simply never brave enough to be the one to tell her. Ethan set the folder down on the desk. He pulled out his phone and called Marco. How is she? Settled, quiet. She asked for tea. A pause. She seems scared. Yeah. Ethan looked at the dead man's desk, at the folder, at 6 years of someone else's careful, well-intentioned destruction. Tell her I'll be there in an hour, he said. And Marco. Yeah, boss? Nobody finds out she's alive. Not yet. Not anyone. A beat. Understood. Ethan put the phone in his pocket, picked up the folder, and walked out of the clinic into the bright, indifferent Manhattan morning. He now knew everything. He had absolutely no idea what to do with it. The Brooklyn safe house was nothing like what Emily had expected.
She wasn't sure what she had expected, some dark, concrete thing that smelled like cigarettes and threat. Instead, the elevator opened into a clean, high-ceilinged apartment on the 7th floor of a building that looked entirely ordinary from the street. Cream walls, good light, a kitchen with actual groceries in it, a bookshelf along one wall, a window that looked out over a quiet stretch of rooftops toward the water. Someone had put a vase of white tulips on the dining table. Emily stood in the entrance and looked at the tulips for a long moment. "Favorite flower?" she asked without turning around. Marco, the large, quiet man who'd driven her here, shifted his weight. "Mr. Cole mentioned it. I can have them removed if—" "No." She set her backpack down. "Leave them." She didn't say anything else about it, but she stood there a beat longer than necessary, and something moved through her that she couldn't name and didn't try to. Ethan arrived 53 minutes later. He came through the door looking like a man who had made several difficult decisions on the drive over, and was still not entirely at peace with any of them. He'd changed. Dark shirt, no jacket, and there was something slightly undone about him that hadn't been there the night before. Less armor. Emily was sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea and a book she'd found on the shelf. She wasn't reading it. She was watching the door. "You said an hour," she said. "Traffic." "You live in Manhattan and you're blaming traffic." Something flickered across his face, almost a smile. "You always hated that excuse." "Did I?" She set the book down. "Or are you just saying that?" The almost smile disappeared. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and put the manila folder on the table between them. Emily looked at it, but didn't reach for it. "What's that?" "The truth," Ethan said. "Or most of it." He told her everything. Not the version he'd considered on the drive over, the careful, edited version that protected her from the harder parts. He'd decided against that somewhere on the bridge. She had already lived 6 years inside someone else's careful editing. She deserved the uncut version now. So he told her about Harris, about the clinic in Connecticut, the private notes, the severity of what the accident had done to the structures in her brain. He told her about Victor Reese, the man who'd made the call, who'd decided her best chance of survival was disappearing, and watched her face as she processed the fact that someone who had apparently cared about her had chosen, on her behalf, that she would never know who she was. He did not tell her everything about himself. Not yet. That particular truth needed its own moment, and this wasn't it. Emily listened without interrupting. She was still in the way that very controlled people are still. Not calm, but contained. Her hands were wrapped around her mug, and she kept her eyes on the folder rather than on him. And when he finished speaking, she didn't react immediately. The clock on the wall ticked. "This Victor," she said finally. "He's dead. 2 years after your accident. And the doctor is dead. 11 days ago. So the 2 people who knew where I was and who I was," she paused, "both gone." "Yes." "Convenient," she said quietly. "For someone." Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean 2 people keeping a secret this size both die within 4 years of each other, and nobody connected those dots?" She met his eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. "Either you're not as good at your job as you seem, or someone made sure you never got close enough to find them." The room went very quiet. Ethan had spent the morning reading Harris's file, constructing a timeline, making his own conclusions. He had not arrived at that one. He sat with it now, the way you sit with something that rearranges the furniture of everything you thought you understood. "What exactly is your job?" Emily asked. Her voice was careful, precise. "You said businessman last night, but the men outside this door aren't businessmen. The car I rode in this morning isn't a businessman's car, and you walked into that lake house at midnight with a loaded gun like someone who's done it before." "I have done it before." "So what are you?" A long pause. "Someone who has made a great number of enemies," he said.
And someone who needs you to be safe while I figure out which one of them has been involved in this from the beginning." It wasn't an answer. They both knew it. But Emily seemed to make a decision about how hard to push, and she leaned back in her chair and looked at the tulips instead. 17 months, she said.
What?
That's how long I've been alone, since Dr. Harris moved me to a small apartment in New Haven and told me he was retiring and that everything was handled. She turned the mug slowly in her hands. Nothing was handled. I had a bank account that stopped receiving transfers 8 weeks after he died. I had a name that wasn't mine and a life I'd built on top of a gap where a real one should have been. She looked at him. I found the lake house because I dreamed about it. Twice. The same dream. The trees, the water, the way the light came through the kitchen window in the morning. I didn't know what it was. I just drove toward it. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had to look away for a moment. "You always said the light in that kitchen was the best light you'd ever seen anywhere," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. Emily was quiet. Then, "Your voice does something strange." He looked back at her. "When you talk about her, about me," she seemed frustrated with herself, with the pronoun problem that had no clean solution. "There's something in your voice that I can't identify. It's not something I can see or analyze. It's something I can only—" She stopped. Her brow creased slightly. "Feel?" he offered. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. "I don't trust you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't know you, and what little I'm beginning to understand about you suggests I should be considerably more frightened than I currently am." "That's reasonable." "But I also don't have anywhere else to go." She set the mug down. "So I'm going to stay. For now. And you're going to find out who did this, who's been managing me like a file in a cabinet for 6 years, and when you do, you're going to tell me first, before you do anything else, whatever that anything else might be." The way she said anything else made clear she had a precise suspicion of what that might involve. "Agreed," Ethan said. Emily nodded once, as though a contract had been signed. She picked up her book again, opened it to a random page, stared at it without reading. "The tulips," she said, not looking up. "Yes. How did you know they were my favorite? You said it so quickly this morning, like you didn't even think about it." Ethan looked at the vase on the table, at the white petals. "Because you told me once that every other flower was just performing," he said. "But tulips just stood there and were exactly what they were. You said you respected that." Emily's eyes stayed on the page of her book, but her hand, resting on the table beside the vase, moved half an inch closer to the flowers. She didn't seem to notice she'd done it. Ethan did. The idea was Marco's, which Ethan would never admit influenced him. "She's going to lose her mind in there," Marco had said that morning, nodding toward the closed bedroom door. "She hasn't left the apartment in 2 days. She's reading the same 3 books on rotation, and she reorganized the kitchen cabinets twice yesterday." "She reorganized the kitchen?" "Alphabetically, by cuisine type." Marco paused. "She also corrected my coffee-to-water ratio and was right about it." Ethan had stood there with that information sitting on him in a way he couldn't entirely explain. Emily had always reorganized things when she was anxious. Drawers, bookshelves, the pantry. He used to find it endearing. He used to deliberately misplace things so she'd have something to fix. He knocked on her door 10 minutes later. "Get dressed," he said through the wood. "We're going out." A pause. "Where?" "Somewhere with air that isn't recycled." Another pause. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." He took her to Central Park first. Not the busy midpoint, not the Bethesda fountain crowd and the tourist carriages, but the north end, where the ravine ran through a stretch of forest so dense you could briefly forget you were inside a city of 8 million people. They walked without his security detail visible, though Ethan knew precisely where each of his 4 men were positioned. To Emily, it would look like 2 people walking. She wore a gray jacket she'd bought with the cash he'd given her and kept her hands in her pockets.
She walked at an even pace and looked at everything with the particular attention of someone who had learned to read environments quickly. Exits, angles, faces. Another thing that hadn't changed. "You scan every person we pass," Ethan said. "Habit." "From what?" "I don't know." She glanced sideways at him. "Is that something she did?" He considered the question. "Not that I ever noticed, but there's a lot I might not have noticed." Emily seemed to file that away. They crossed a stone footbridge over the ravine stream, and she slowed without seeming to realize it. She stopped at the midpoint of the bridge and looked down at the water moving over the rocks below. The morning light came through the trees in long, slanted lines and turned the stream gold in patches. Ethan stopped beside her and said nothing. "I've been here before," Emily said quietly. His pulse shifted. "Yes." "Not as—" She pressed her lips together. "I mean, I have a memory of this bridge. A real one, not a dream. There's a woman laughing." She paused. "I think the woman is me, but she doesn't feel like me." "What does she feel like?" Emily thought about it. "Someone who hadn't learned yet that things go wrong." The words settled over them both like weather. Ethan gripped the bridge railing and looked at the water. "We came here the first autumn after we got married. You made me walk the entire park from south to north, which took 3 hours, and by the end my feet were in genuine distress, and you had no sympathy whatsoever." The corner of Emily's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That sounds correct." "You stopped on this bridge and said you wanted to live somewhere you could walk to it every morning." He paused. "We bought the apartment on Central Park West 4 months later." Emily looked at him. "You still have it?" "I still have everything." She turned back to the water and was quiet for a long time. "That must be a terrible way to live," she said finally, gently, not cruelly, "keeping all of it exactly as it was." Ethan said nothing because she was not wrong. The cafe was on Riverside Drive, a small, unloved-looking place from the outside that opened into something warm and close, with wooden tables and windows that ran the full length of the western wall and looked out over the Hudson. The water caught the midday light and held it in long silver sheets that shifted as boats passed. Emily chose the table by the window without hesitation, then stopped, looked at the chair, looked at the window. "We sat here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Every Sunday. You had the same thing every time, black coffee and whatever pastry they told you was almost finished, because you said those were always the best ones." Emily sat down slowly, as if the chair might give way beneath her. A server came. Emily ordered black coffee without looking at the menu. When the server left, she pressed both hands flat against the table and stared at them. "It's getting worse," she said. "The memories?" "The feeling." She looked up. "It's not like remembering. It's like being pulled, like standing too close to an edge." She exhaled carefully. "At the bridge, I felt something that wasn't fear and wasn't happiness, and I couldn't name it, and that was the most frightening part. Not the memory, the feeling." "Grief," Ethan said quietly. "That's what grief feels like when you can't remember what you lost." Emily stared at him. The coffee came. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked out at the river, and Ethan watched the light move across her face and tried to remember the last time he'd sat in this cafe. 4 years ago, maybe? He'd come alone, ordered nothing, sat at this table for 20 minutes and left. He told himself afterward he wouldn't do it again. He'd done it twice more after that. "Tell me something that isn't about her," Emily said suddenly. He blinked. "What?" "About me. About who she was." She turned from the window. "Tell me something about you. Something I wouldn't have been able to find on that phone." Ethan considered it carefully. "I was afraid of you the first time I met you," he said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "You?" "You were at a gallery opening in Soho.
I'd been to approximately one gallery in my life before that and hadn't understood it. And you were standing in front of a painting that I also didn't understand and explaining to the person beside you exactly what made it extraordinary. Not performing, genuinely talking about it, like it mattered. He paused. I stood behind you for 4 minutes listening. Then you turned around and looked at me and said, "You've been there long enough to have an opinion." And I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. Emily was watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read.
"What did you say?"
I said the painting looked like a headache. He paused. You laughed. That was it. That was how it started. Something crossed her face, a tremor of something real and uncontrolled, and she looked back out at the river quickly, as if she could hide it from him if she was fast enough. She wasn't fast enough. Ethan saw it, said nothing, filed it in the same careful place he'd filed the hand moving toward the tulips, the way she'd ordered coffee without looking at the menu, the way she'd chosen this table like her body remembered what her mind didn't. Then Emily set down her coffee and looked at him with an expression that was entirely different from any she'd worn before. Not fearful, not careful, not measuring. Something harder and more direct. "Who are you hiding me from, Ethan?" The first time she'd used his name. Neither of them acknowledged it, but the air in the room changed slightly, the way air does when something that's been held back finally moves.
"People who would use you to get to me," he said.
"And how would they know I'm alive?"
"They might already."
Emily absorbed that, set her cup down. "Then why are we sitting in a cafe window?" she said slowly. "In full view of a public street." Ethan had already clocked the black sedan that had made the same circuit of Riverside Drive 3 times in the past 20 minutes. He'd already texted Marco. He'd already made the calculation that moving now was better than waiting. But the way she'd said it, the speed of her reasoning, the instinct beneath it, made something cold settle in his stomach. She hadn't remembered yet, but she was already thinking like someone who understood danger. Some things, it seemed, lived somewhere deeper than memory. "Finish your coffee," he said, keeping his voice even. "We're leaving in 2 minutes." Emily looked at the window, then at him. She didn't finish the coffee. She was already standing. The black sedan belonged to a man named Pavel Rusk. Ethan knew this within 3 hours of leaving the cafe. He knew it the way he knew most things, through a network of people who owed him information the way others owed money, with interest compounding quietly in the background until the moment he called it in. Pavel Rusk was the operations head of the Volkov Syndicate, a Russian-backed organization that had been slowly and methodically trying to absorb territory on the eastern seaboard for the past 4 years. They were patient in the way that only people with long institutional memory were patient. They didn't rush, they didn't overreach. They simply waited until the moment was exactly right, and then moved with a precision that left no room for recovery. Ethan had been their primary obstacle for 2 of those 4 years. He sat in the back room of a restaurant he owned in Red Hook and stared at the photograph on the table in front of him. It had been taken that morning, through a long lens, from somewhere across Riverside Drive. Ethan walking. Emily beside him in her gray jacket, her face turned slightly toward the window, the Hudson behind them. Someone had been watching before the sedan. The sedan had been deliberate, a signal, not a mistake. Pavel Rusk was telling Ethan he knew. The question that mattered now was how. 4 people knew she was at the safe house, Marco said, standing across the table. His arms were crossed, and his expression carried the particular tension of a man who understood exactly how bad this was. "You, me, and 2 of my guys." "1 of your guys," Ethan said. Marco went very still. "Danny Reyes has been supplementing his income," Ethan said. "Has been for about 8 months. Small amounts, regular, from an account that traces back eventually to a property management company in Queens that Volkov has been using as a front." He picked up the photograph and held it for a moment, then set it face down. He didn't know about Emily specifically. He knew she was someone important. That was enough. "Where is he now?" "Handled."
Marco didn't ask what that meant. In 15 years of working for Ethan Cole, he had learned precisely which questions not to ask. Rusk knows she's alive, Ethan continued. He doesn't know who she is yet, not specifically, but he knows she matters enough to hide, which means he'll start looking. He'll find out within 48 hours if we don't move. Move her where? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about something Harris had written in the folder. The moment Ethan knows she's alive, every enemy he has will know within a week. The dead man had been right about the timeline, nearly to the day. He'd been 6 years too conservative about when the clock would start. Keep her at the safe house for tonight, Ethan said. Rotate the security. Nobody knew. And Marco, she doesn't find out about any of this. Marco nodded, but something in his expression suggested he had doubts about the wisdom of that particular decision. He would, as it happened, be correct to doubt it. Emily found the second phone at 9 p.m. It was in the kitchen drawer, beneath a takeout menu and a notepad, a cheap prepaid device still in its packaging. One of the security team had put it there as a backup emergency contact, a standard protocol. They hadn't told her about it because they hadn't told her about most things. She stood at the kitchen counter and turned the unopened package over in her hands. She had spent the afternoon thinking. This was, she had discovered, over 6 years of building herself from nothing, what she did when she was frightened. She thought. Systematically. Without the interference of feeling until the thinking was done. It was possibly the only reliable thing she knew about herself, and here was what the thinking had produced. The black sedan on Riverside Drive had made 3 passes. Ethan had seen it. She'd watched his eyes track it through the cafe window in a way that was so practiced it was nearly invisible. He had made a decision not to tell her. He had made a decision about how much she needed to know, and had arrived at a number smaller than the truth. The men outside the apartment door had changed 3 times today, new faces each rotation. That was not routine. And Ethan, who had appeared every morning since the lake house like a fixed point she'd been unconsciously orienting herself around, had not come tonight. She was being managed, carefully and perhaps with genuine care, but managed nonetheless, kept inside the dimensions of what someone else had decided was safe for her. This was, she recognized with a cold and specific clarity, exactly what Dr. Harris had done for 6 years, exactly what Victor Reese had designed, a comfortable enclosure built from other people's decisions about what she could handle. She had woken up 6 years ago with no name, no history, no memory of a single person who loved her, and she had built a life with her bare hands from that nothing. She had learned to cook, to read architecture the way other people read faces, to navigate cities she didn't know, to trust her instincts when everything else was unavailable. Her instincts were telling her something very clearly right now. You are not safe here. Not because of Ethan, or not only because of Ethan, but because whatever was circling outside that window was circling because of her connection to him. Being near him made her a target. Being hidden by him made her dependent. Both of those things were unacceptable to a woman who had survived 6 years on nothing but her own competence. She opened the prepaid phone's packaging quietly. She spent an hour planning. It was methodical and practical, and she felt, doing it, a strange absence of guilt that told her something about who she'd been before the accident. A more sentimental woman might have agonized over it. Emily, Claire, whoever she was, drew a small map on the notepad, memorized it, tore the page into pieces small enough to be meaningless. She knew there were men outside the apartment door. She did not know if there were men watching the building's rear exit, which accessed the service corridor that ran to the parking structure on the next block. She was going to find out. She packed lightly. What she'd arrived with, plus the cash she hadn't spent from the envelope Ethan had given her, folded into the inside pocket of her jacket. She moved the canvas backpack to the chair by the door. Ready. Then, she sat on the edge of the bed and did something she hadn't planned to do. She opened the photos on the phone Ethan had left her.
A new one, transferred from his, and looked at them again. Not with the detached clinical attention of 2 nights ago. She looked at them the way you look at something you're about to leave behind. The sailing boat photo, her face thrown back, laughing at something. The absolute unguarded quality of it. She put the phone face down on the bed. Then she picked it up again and looked one more time. At her own face. At the way his arm sat around her shoulder. Not possessive, not careful. Easy. Like it had always been there and expected to stay. She put the phone in her jacket pocket. She told herself it was in case she needed to contact him. She was not entirely sure that was the reason. At 11 p.m., she tested the bathroom window that opened onto the fire escape. It opened without noise. She stood there for a moment, the cold night air coming off the rooftops, the city doing its endless, indifferent thing below. Then she heard it, from the living room, the low murmur of the security team's radio crackling to life, a voice she didn't recognize, and then one word she understood with terrible, immediate clarity. Volkov. She didn't know what Volkov was. She understood from the tone of the voice that it was something that should make her run. She went back to the bed, sat down, pulled out the prepaid phone and found the bus terminal schedule she'd already looked up. Port Authority, last bus to Trenton at 12:40 a.m. From Trenton, she could go anywhere. She had done more with less. She looked at the tulips on the dining table, visible through the open bedroom door, white and still in the apartment's quiet light. She looked away. 12:40 a.m. She had 90 minutes. She made it out through the fire escape at 11:34 p.m. The service corridor was empty. The parking structure was not monitored on the 3rd level, a gap she'd identified by listening carefully to the security team's radio patterns over 2 days, the way you learn a language by immersion rather than instruction. She moved quickly and without hesitation, which was the only way to move when you'd made a decision you weren't entirely at peace with. The street received her without ceremony, just cold air and the ordinary noise of Brooklyn at night, distant music, a truck somewhere, the city's permanent low hum that never fully slept. She pulled her jacket collar up, shifted the backpack on her shoulders, and walked east toward the subway. She did not look back at the building. She almost did. Once. At the corner. She kept walking. The A train to Manhattan took 19 minutes. She stood the whole way, holding the overhead rail, watching the car's other passengers with a quiet attention she'd never been able to turn off. A couple asleep against each other. A night shift worker with paint on his boots. A teenage girl doing homework on her phone. Ordinary people inside their ordinary lives, completely unaware that the woman standing 6 feet away was running from something she couldn't fully name, toward somewhere she hadn't yet decided on. Port Authority Bus Terminal at 12:10 a.m. was its own particular world, fluorescent and exhausted, smelling of floor cleaner and fast food and the specific staleness of transient spaces. Emily bought a ticket to Trenton at the automated machine with cash and found a seat against the far wall with a clear sightline to all 3 entrance points. Old habit. No memory required. The 12:40 bus was showing on the board. 30 minutes. She bought a coffee from the vending machine. Bad, thin, too hot. And sat with it and thought about nothing specific, which was the only way she knew to stop thinking about specific things. It worked for 11 minutes. Then Ethan walked through the main entrance. He didn't look frantic. That was the first thing she noticed, and it irritated her in a way she couldn't justify. He looked like a man who had known where she was going before she'd fully decided to go there, which was either impressive or infuriating, or both. He was still in the dark shirt from that afternoon. His eyes found her in approximately 4 seconds, also irritating, and he walked toward her at a pace that was deliberate rather than urgent, like he was giving her time to decide whether to run again. She stayed seated. He sat down in the chair beside her without asking, not across from her, beside her, both of them facing the same direction, looking out at the terminal floor.
"The 1240 to Trenton," he said. "Smart. You could go anywhere from Trenton."
"I know. You left the phone I gave you on the bed." "I left the one you gave me," she said. "I have another one." A pause. "The prepaid from the kitchen drawer. Your security team is sloppy about what they leave lying around. I'll pass that feedback along." He was quiet for a moment. "You heard the radio." "Volkov," she said. One word, said the way people say things when the thing itself is the whole explanation. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the terminal floor. "How did you find me?" she asked.
"Traffic cameras from the building's block. You went east, which meant subway, which meant Manhattan. From Manhattan, if you're leaving the city quietly at midnight with cash, you're going to Port Authority or Penn Station." He paused. "You strike me as a Port Authority kind of decision."
"What does that mean?"
"Penn Station is the obvious choice. You don't do the obvious thing when you're scared. You do the practical thing."
Emily looked at the side of his face. "You know me well enough to predict how I run away from you," she said.
"Yes."
No hesitation, no apology. The bus board flickered, 1240 now showing boarding. Neither of them moved. "Ethan," her voice came out steadier than she felt, "tell me what Volkov is. Tell me what's actually happening outside that apartment, not the version where I'm protected from the parts you've decided are too much. The real version." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to give her the edited version anyway. She was already calculating whether the bus door was still open if she moved now. Then he said, "I run organized crime in New York. Have for 12 years. Volkov is a Russian syndicate trying to take my territory. They know you're alive, and they've connected you to me, which means they'll use you. As leverage, as bait, as a way to get me to make a mistake." He turned and looked at her directly. "That's what Volkov is, and that is what I am." The terminal noise continued around them, indifferent. Emily absorbed it. She'd suspected it, had built the architecture of it from details and instinct over 5 days. Suspecting something and hearing it stated plainly were entirely different experiences. "A crime boss," she said.
"Yes."
"Our life together, the apartment, the lake house, Tuscany," she stopped. "All of it built on—"
"Yes."
She stood up, not running, just needing to be vertical. She took 3 steps toward the boarding gate and stopped, her back to him. "I trusted my instincts about you," she said, "from the very first night. I knew there was something dangerous about you. I knew it, and I stayed anyway."
"You stayed because—"
"Because I had no one else." She turned around. Her voice was controlled, but something behind her eyes wasn't. "Don't make it more than that. Not right now." Ethan stood. He was careful to keep distance between them.
"Emily."
"Claire."
"No."
His voice was quiet but final. "Not anymore. You know who you are now. You have a right to your name." Something broke open slightly in her expression, just briefly, just a fracture, and then she pulled it closed.
"You lied to me. 4 days of careful half-truths."
"Yes. While people were already watching us, while I was already in danger because of you." "Yes." He didn't flinch from any of it. "Everything you're saying is accurate. I made the choice to protect you from the truth because I thought I could manage the situation before it reached you. I was wrong." A pause. "I'm frequently wrong about what people can handle, specifically about what you can handle, because you have always been capable of considerably more than I gave you credit for, and apparently 6 years of amnesia hasn't changed that." Emily stared at him. Despite everything, the anger, the fear, the vertiginous feeling of standing in a bus terminal at midnight having a conversation that kept rewriting what she understood about her own life, something in her chest responded to that last sentence in a way that had nothing to do with logic. "You have always been capable of considerably more than I gave you credit for." "The people outside," she said. "Volkov, how close are they?" Close enough that standing in a public terminal is not ideal. He said it calmly. I have men outside. We can move quietly if we go now. Where? Somewhere I can keep you safe while we finish this. Finish it how? A pause that told her more than his answer would have. Ethan, her voice dropped. How do you plan to finish it? The way I finish most things, he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment, at the man who was her husband and a stranger and a criminal and the person whose voice did something in her chest she still couldn't name, and made a decision. If something happens to me because of your world, she said quietly, that's a consequence I walked into with open eyes. I can accept that. She picked up her backpack. But if something happens because you hid things from me that I could have used to protect myself, that's on you, and I won't forgive it. Understood. I mean it. I know you mean it, Ethan said. You always meant everything you said. It was one of the more terrifying things about you. She almost said something to that. She turned for the exit instead. He fell into step beside her, and neither of them spoke as they moved through the terminal's harsh light toward the doors, the night, and whatever was already waiting for them in it. Outside, somewhere in the New Jersey dark, 2 black cars that were not Ethan's began to move. The ambush came 11 minutes outside the terminal, not in Newark, not at any warehouse. It came on a service road running parallel to the turnpike, a narrow strip of asphalt between a chain-link fence and a concrete sound barrier, the kind of road that existed purely for utility and was empty at this hour for exactly that reason. Ethan's driver saw the blockade too late. 2 vehicles across the road, headlights off. By the time Marco's voice crackled through the earpiece, "It's Volkov. It's a hit. Turn the car around," there was already a 3rd vehicle filling the rearview mirror. "Down," Ethan said. Emily was already low in her seat. The first shot took out the rear window. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not something Emily experienced in sequence. It came in fragments: sound, pressure, movement, cold air, stitched together by adrenaline into something that only resembled order after the fact. The car door, Ethan pulling her out the left side while the right side took fire, gravel under her hands as she hit the ground, his body between her and the muzzle flash, the chain-link fence giving way at a weak point. Someone had found it, prepared it, which meant this location wasn't random, which meant something had gone very wrong somewhere in Ethan's circle. Then they were through the fence and running, an empty lot, a disused industrial building beyond it, windows long gone, the skeleton of something that had once manufactured something nobody needed anymore. Ethan's hand on her arm, not dragging, guiding, and the sound of men coming through the fence behind them. 3 shots in close succession. Ethan's grip on her arm didn't loosen, but his breath changed. She knew the sound of someone absorbing damage and deciding not to stop moving. She didn't know how she knew it. They went through a ground-level opening in the building's wall, a loading bay, the door rusted off its hinges, and into the dark interior. Concrete floor, iron pillars. The distant ambient light of the highway filtered through the empty window frames in thin gray slices. Ethan pulled her behind a pillar and they stopped. She heard him breathe, short, controlled. "You're hit," she said. "Shoulder." His voice was even. "Through and through. I've had worse." "That's not—" She stopped herself. Outside, the sound of footsteps on gravel, multiple sets, moving carefully, spreading out. "How many?" she whispered. 4 came through the fence. Marco will have the others tied up at the road. He was already scanning the building's interior with the calm of a man doing arithmetic. "Marco's team will be here in 3 minutes. We need 2. 2 minutes. Yes." Emily pressed her back against the pillar and looked at the space around them. The pillars, the loading bay opening they'd come through, 2 other ground-level gaps on the far wall, a metal staircase leading to a collapsed upper level. She catalogued it the way she'd catalogued every space she'd been in for 6 years, the habit so deep it operated without instruction. "They'll come through the loading bay and split left and right," she said quietly. The two far openings create a crossfire problem for them. They can't cover all three simultaneously. Ethan looked at her. If one of us draws them left, she continued, the other goes right and out the far wall. They'd have to choose. That's... He stopped. What? That's exactly the assessment I just made. Something passed between them in the dark. Not words, not even a look. A frequency, like two instruments recognizing the same note. I'll draw them left, she said. Absolutely not. You're bleeding. You need the cleaner exit. She held his gaze. Don't manage me right now. We don't have time. A beat. 1 second. His jaw tightened. Far right opening, he said. 30 seconds after you move. Don't stop. She nodded. She left the pillar before she could think about it any further. What happened next happened in the dark. A shout. Running footsteps. Hers, theirs, converging and then diverging. A shot that hit the pillar 2 feet from where she'd been standing. She moved low and fast between the iron columns, drawing them left, buying him the seconds he needed. Then something caught her foot, a length of rebar on the floor, invisible, and she went down hard. The concrete came up fast and she hit it with her hands, and her right temple, and the world tilted sideways in a way that had nothing to do with the impact. Because the darkness of the building's interior suddenly wasn't empty. It filled. Not images, not photographs played back cleanly, more like being submerged, warmth and cold arriving simultaneously, a flooding of the senses that bypassed thought entirely. His voice sang her name in a room full of morning light, her own laughter in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cedar. A fight. Their voices raised, something she'd said that she couldn't retrieve the words for but could feel the weight of, the shape of it. I can't keep pretending this world of yours doesn't exist. I can't keep living in the clean room while the rest of it... Rain. The windshield. Route 9 at night. Her hands on the steering wheel. Her choice to drive. Her decision to leave that night instead of waiting until morning the way he'd asked her to. His face through the rain-blurred window of their apartment building as she'd pulled away, not knowing it was the last time he'd see her alive. She had been leaving him. The floor was cold against her cheek. She had been leaving him the night of the accident. Not a romantic drive, not a kidnapping, not an enemy's doing. She had packed a bag, put it in the car, and driven into a rainstorm because she had finally decided that loving someone and surviving their world were two things that could not coexist, and survival mattered more. And then the river, and then 6 years. And now the cold concrete floor of an abandoned building in Newark, while someone ran toward her with a gun. The shot didn't come. The sound that came instead was a single impact, short, definitive, and then silence. And then Ethan was beside her on the floor, one hand on her shoulder, his breathing ragged now in a way he could no longer fully control. Stay down, he said. Marco's team is... I remember, she said. He went absolutely still. I remember everything. Her voice was flat, not with absence, but with the particular flatness of someone holding something enormous very carefully. The apartment. The morning I left. The rain. Ethan said nothing. She pushed herself up onto her knees. In the thin gray light through the empty windows, she could see his face, the control in it, and underneath the control, something that had been waiting 6 years for this exact moment and was now afraid of what it meant. I was leaving you, she said. I know. You knew? Not that night. I figured it out. Later. A few years after. He sat back against a pillar, his right hand pressed to his shoulder, blood dark between his fingers. Your bag was packed. It wasn't in the wreck. You'd already put it somewhere. A friend's place, I found out eventually. You'd made plans. And you still... She stopped. You still came to the lake house. You still... You were alive. His voice was quiet and entirely without drama. What you were planning to do before the accident didn't change what I wanted for you after it." Outside, the sound of Marco's vehicles arriving, shouted instructions, the situation collapsing into order the way these things did when Ethan Cole's machinery finally caught up. Emily sat on the concrete floor of an abandoned building with her husband's blood on her hands, from where she'd pressed her palm to his shoulder without deciding to, and held the complete, unedited map of her own life in her mind for the first time in 6 years. All of it. The love and the fear and the beautiful, suffocating impossibility of it. The reason she'd driven into a rainstorm, the reason some subconscious thread had pulled her back to a lake house in the dark. You could love someone completely and still be unable to survive them. That had been true 6 years ago. She looked at him, at this man who had kept everything exactly as it was, who had sat on the floor of his own kitchen with his hands raised so she wouldn't be afraid, who had told her about a gallery in Soho and a sailing boat and white tulips, and felt the love move through her like something seismic, followed immediately and without apology by the knowledge that had sent her into that rainstorm. Some things survived amnesia. Some things survived for a reason. 3 weeks later, she found him at the lake house. He was sitting on the porch at dusk, looking at the water, and he heard her car on the gravel and didn't turn around. She sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. "I remember everything," she said finally. "I've remembered for 3 weeks." "I know." "I needed to sit with it." "I know that, too." The lake made its sounds. The light went the color of old copper on the water. "I loved you," Emily said. "I want you to know that I'm not confused about that. I loved you completely." "Past tense," he said. "No." She looked at him. "That's what I needed 3 weeks to understand. It's not past tense. It doesn't go away." She paused. "But it also wasn't enough to stay 6 years ago, and it isn't enough now. And I think—" Her voice held steady. "I think you know that." Ethan looked at the water. "I know that," he said. She stood, put her hand on his shoulder, the left one, the one that wasn't still healing, for one brief moment. "The lake house should have light in it again," she said. "Don't leave it abandoned." She walked back to the car. He listened to the gravel under her tires until the sound was gone, until the lake was the only thing left. Ethan Cole sat in the dark as it came down over Black Pine Lake and did not reach for his phone, or call anyone, or make a single decision about power or territory or the machinery of the life he'd built. He just sat there, and for the first time in 6 years, the grief had a shape he could hold, because this time he knew exactly what he'd lost, and he knew she'd chosen it, and he loved her enough to let that be enough. The hospital was not a real hospital. It was 3 floors of a private medical facility on the Upper East Side that had no signage on its exterior and accepted no public patients and appeared on no insurance network. Ethan Cole had funded its construction 11 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with the recurring inconvenience of gunshot wounds that couldn't be explained to emergency room intake staff. Emily knew none of this when Marco drove her there at 2 a.m. She learned it gradually, the way you learn the dimensions of a room by moving through it in the dark. She sat in the corridor outside the surgical suite for 2 hours, not because anyone had asked her to, not because she felt she owed it. She sat there because her legs had made the decision independently, sometime around the moment she'd pressed her hand to Ethan's shoulder in the building and felt the warmth of blood between her fingers. And her legs had not yet revised that decision. The corridor was clean and quiet. A man she didn't know stood at the far end with his arms crossed, watching the elevator. Another sat beside the stairwell door. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody asked her to leave. She had both hands in her lap and the complete map of her life moving through her like a slow current she couldn't stand up against. Because it hadn't stopped at the warehouse, the memories kept coming. Not all at once, not the cinematic flood she might have expected, more like a tide coming in, each wave depositing something new on the shore. Their first apartment, smaller than the Central Park one, in a building on West 82nd that had unreliable heating and a neighbor who played the same jazz record every Sunday. The particular sound of Ethan's voice on the phone late at night when he thought she was asleep. The way she'd learned, slowly and then all at once, the true nature of what he did. Not from him, never from him, but from the careful negative space of what he never said, the calls he stepped out to take, the men who appeared and disappeared, the way rooms rearranged themselves around his authority before he'd said a word. She remembered loving him through all of that. She remembered the specific way that love had started to calcify under the weight of knowing. Not into something less, but into something she could no longer hold alongside herself without losing herself in the process. She remembered packing the bag. She remembered her hands on the steering wheel at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, driving into rain, telling herself she would call him from wherever she ended up, that she owed him that much. She had not made that call. She had gone into the river instead. A doctor she didn't know emerged from the surgical suite at 4 a.m. and told her he was stable, through and through, as Ethan had said, but the bullet had nicked something that required attention, and he'd lost significant blood, and he would need several days of rest, which was, the doctor added with the flat tone of a man who had said this particular thing many times before, a recommendation his patient had historically treated as a suggestion. "Can I see him?" Emily asked. The doctor looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally curious. "Are you family?" A pause that contained 6 years and a river and an empty grave. "Yes," she said. He was awake. She hadn't expected that. She'd prepared herself for the easier version, him unconscious, her able to sit and look at him without the complication of reciprocity. Instead, he was propped slightly against the pillows with an IV in his left arm and the look of a man who had been arguing with his own pain threshold and winning on points. He saw her and said nothing. She sat in the chair beside the bed, put her bag on the floor, looked at the monitors, and then at her hands, and then, finally, at him. "You should sleep," she said. "Probably." The doctor said, "I know what the doctor said." A pause. "I pay the doctor." "That doesn't make him wrong." Ethan almost smiled. "No, it doesn't." Silence. Not uncomfortable. The particular silence of two people who have too much to say and are making separate calculations about where to begin. "It came back," Emily said. "Everything. It's been coming in since the warehouse. It hasn't stopped." He looked at her carefully. "All of it?" "All of it." She held his gaze. "The apartment on West 82nd, the neighbor with the jazz record, the first time I understood what you actually were. Not a businessman, not a gray area, but what you actually were. And the fact that I stayed anyway." She paused. "And the bag I packed." "Emily." "I'm not bringing it up as an accusation. I'm bringing it up because it's part of the map, and I need you to know I have the whole map now." She looked at the window, dark still, the city's glow on the low clouds outside. "I stayed for 4 years, knowing. I want you to know I'm not someone who loved you blindly. I knew exactly what you were, and I chose you anyway, for as long as I could." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's more generous than it needs to be." "It's accurate," she said. "I don't do generous. You should remember that." Something moved through his expression. Recognition, deep and unguarded, the kind that couldn't be managed. "I remember," he said quietly. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. She did not examine her reasons too carefully. She brought coffee, real coffee, from the place on Lexington she'd found by walking, and which had turned out, with a lurch of recognition she'd managed to keep off her face, to be the same cafe she and Ethan had gone to every Saturday morning for 3 years. The owner had looked at her with an expression of startled recognition that she'd deflected with a smile and a quick order. The city was full of landmines that looked like ordinary streets. She was learning to walk through it anyway. On the second day, Marco came to the room while Ethan was sleeping and sat down heavily in the other chair with the air of a man who had something to say and had been deciding whether to say it for some time. "He didn't sleep for 3 days after the accident," Marco said. 6 years ago, when they said you were dead." He looked at his hands. "And then, when he came back, he was different. Harder, like he'd removed something and filled the space with concrete." He paused. "We didn't talk about you. Nobody talked about you, but he kept everything." "I know," Emily said. "The apartment, the lake house, all of it." Marco was quiet for a moment. "He's a difficult man to work for. He's a complicated man to know." A long pause. "He's a good man in the specific ways that matter, and a dangerous one in all the others." Emily looked at Ethan sleeping. "I know that too," she said. Marco nodded once and left. On the third day, Ethan was sitting up and asking for his phone, which the nursing staff had confiscated on Marco's instructions, and Emily arrived to find him in a heated and largely one-sided debate with his own IV stand about the unreasonableness of the situation. She set the coffee down, took the IV stand's side, and won the argument in under 2 minutes. Ethan stared at her. "You did that exact thing." "I know," she said. "Every time I know." She sat down. "I remember." He was quiet. "Does it feel the same?" he asked. Not quite carefully enough, for him. The question had the quality of something that had escaped before he could decide whether to let it out. Emily thought about how to answer that honestly. "It feels like reading a book I read once," she said finally. "I remember every word. I know how it ends, but I'm a different person reading it now." She looked at him. "The love is the same. It's identical. That's the part I didn't expect." She paused. "The fear is the same too." "Fear of me?" "Fear of this." She gestured at the room, the security detail outside, the private facility, the IV delivering consequence. "Of what loving you costs." Ethan said nothing. She leaned forward and put both hands around the coffee cup. "Tell me something," she said, "and tell me the truth. If I hadn't had the accident, if I'd gotten wherever I was going that night and called you, like I'd planned to, what would you have done?" The question sat between them. Ethan looked at her for a long time. "I would have come to wherever you were," he said, "and I would have told you that you were right about everything. And then I would have asked you to give me time to prove something could change." He paused. "And you would have said that time was the one thing you'd already given me and couldn't give more of." Emily nodded slowly. "And what would you have done then?" A long silence. "I don't know," he said. It sounded like the most honest thing he'd ever said. She stood up, put on her jacket, picked up her bag. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me," she said quietly. "I'm aware." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Emily stopped. She thought about the cafe on Lexington, about the tulips still alive in the safe house, nobody having thought to throw them out, about the man in the hospital bed who had sat on the floor of his own kitchen with his hands raised and a broken voice and 6 years of grief wearing his face, about the bag she had packed and the rain and the reason. "Yes," she said. She left before either of them could decide what that meant. Outside in the corridor, the security detail parted for her silently, and the elevator came quickly, and the city received her into its ordinary, indifferent morning. And Emily Cole, the name fitting her again now, after 6 years of Claire, like a coat she'd put back on and found still warm, walked into it carrying everything she remembered. All of the love, all of the reason, both at full weight, at the same time. This was, she was beginning to understand, exactly what it had always been. She told him on a Thursday, not at the hospital, not at the safe house. She called him in the morning and asked him to meet her at the cafe on Lexington, and he came without asking why, which told her he already knew. Some part of him had always known. She understood that now, that Ethan Cole had always been better at accepting difficult truths than he was at preventing them. His particular damage ran in the opposite direction. He let things happen that he could see coming, because stopping them would have required him to be a different person entirely. She was already at the corner table when he arrived. He looked better, a week out of the hospital, and the color had returned to his face, though he moved his right shoulder with a careful deliberateness that would probably last another month. He ordered coffee without looking at the menu. The same thing, the same way, without thinking about it. And she watched him do it and felt the love move through her chest like light through water, present and warm and illuminating everything it touched, including the shape of what she had to say. "I've been offered a position," she said. He looked up from his cup. "A teaching position, Columbia, an associate in the architecture faculty. The department chair is someone I apparently knew before. She reached out through the university's records when she saw my name come up through—" She paused. It doesn't matter how. She remembered me. She said I was the best graduate student she'd supervised in 20 years, and that the position was mine if I wanted it. Ethan said nothing. "Columbia has faculty housing," Emily continued, "on Morningside Heights. A small apartment, nothing remarkable, but it would be mine." She looked at her hands on the table. "I've already said yes." "When?" 2 days ago. He nodded once, slowly. "You didn't tell me." "I needed to be certain before I told you, because once I told you, the next conversation was always going to be this one." She looked at him. "And I wasn't ready for this conversation 2 days ago." The cafe made its ordinary sounds around them, the owner moving behind the counter, the door opening and closing with its small bell. Saturday morning traffic on Lexington, ordinary people inside their ordinary lives, the city doing what it always did regardless of what occurred within it. "Are you ready now?" Ethan asked. "No," she said, "but I'm going anyway." She had rehearsed this, not the words exactly. She wasn't a person who scripted. She never had been. She remembered that now with the rest of it. But the shape of it, the architecture, where the load-bearing points were, where she needed to be precise, and where precision would be a way of hiding from something that deserved to be said plainly. "I remember loving you," she said. "I want to be exact about this. Not loved, past tense, closed file. I remember it as something present, something that didn't stop during 6 years of not knowing you existed, something that apparently navigated me back to a lake house in the dark, without a map." She paused. "That's not a small thing. I'm not treating it as a small thing." Ethan's hands were around his cup, and he was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the photos. The sailing boat, the cafe by the Hudson, all of it. The particular expression of a man for whom she was the only thing in the room. It had always been both the most wonderful and most terrible thing about him. "But here is what is also true," she continued. "I packed a bag 6 years ago. I drove into a rainstorm. And the reason I did those things hasn't changed because I spent 6 years not remembering it. The world you live in, the men outside every door, the black sedans, a bullet in your shoulder because someone wanted to use me to get to you." She stopped. "I almost lost my life again. Not in a river this time. In an abandoned building in Newark, on a concrete floor, because of who you are." "I know. I can't live inside that. I tried for 4 years. I tried with everything I had." Her voice was steady. She had promised herself it would be steady. "And I know that you—" She stopped again, started differently. "I know what you feel. I know it's not a performance, and it's not manipulation, and it's not something I can dismiss. I know you would burn down half of New York to keep me safe. She looked at him directly. That's exactly the problem. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Then, I've thought about getting out. Emily went very still. Not recently, years ago, before the accident. He set his cup down. I thought about what it would take, how long, whether there was a version of the next 10 years where I handed things over and stepped back and became something closer to the businessman I always told you I was. He paused. And I could never see the ending of it. There's no clean door out of what I do. There are just varying degrees of exposure. I know that. But I want you to know I thought about it. Because you. Emily absorbed that, held it carefully. That might be the saddest thing you've ever said to me, she said quietly. Probably. He looked at the window, at the street, at the ordinary Thursday morning existing indifferently outside. Where will you go after Columbia? Eventually. I don't know yet. Somewhere with good light. She almost smiled. You know I have opinions about light. I know. Maybe the coast. Maine, possibly. I always apparently liked Maine. You did. You liked the cold. You said it made everything feel more real. That sounds right. She looked at her hands. I'm going to build something. A real life this time. Deliberately. Not from nothing the way I did the first time. I have the memories now. I have the whole map. I know who I am. She paused. I know who I am, and I know what I need, and those two things point in the same direction. Away from me. Toward myself, she said. There's a difference. Ethan looked at her. Is there? He asked. Not bitterly, genuinely. Yes, she held his gaze. Because I'm not leaving because I don't love you. I'm leaving because I do, and I've learned, the hard way, twice now, that loving you and disappearing into your world are the same thing, and I refuse to disappear again. They sat for another 20 minutes. They didn't talk about the important things anymore. They talked about the coffee, which was good, and the architecture of the building across the street, which Emily assessed with the fluency of someone who had apparently always seen buildings that way. And Ethan listened to her talk about load-bearing facades with an expression of such complete and undefended tenderness that she had to look at the street again for a moment. When they stood to leave, he put enough cash on the table to cover the coffee 3 times over, which she suspected had always been his habit, and she didn't comment on it. On the pavement outside, he stopped. JFK? He said. She looked at him. I'm going to Connecticut first, to see where I lived, the apartment in New Haven. She paused. I need to close it properly, say goodbye to it. She shifted her bag on her shoulder, and then I'll come back and start at Columbia in the spring. So not JFK. Not today. Something shifted in him. Relief, she thought, and understood it. Today was not the last day. Today was the second to last, or the 5th, or the 20th. The goodbye was not a single moment, but a direction they were both walking in, slowly, without pretending it was something else. I'll walk you to the subway, he said. You don't have to. I know. She let him. At the entrance to the 68th Street station, she stopped and turned around. He was standing on the pavement with his hands in his pockets and the Manhattan morning behind him, and he looked, for just a moment, stripped of every layer the years had put on him, like the man from the gallery in Soho. The man who had said a painting looked like a headache and made her laugh. The man she had chosen, completely and without reservation, before she understood what choosing him would cost. She understood now. She chose differently. The lake house, she said. He looked at her. Put light in it again. Open it up. Let it be a place that's lived in. She held his gaze. You kept everything closed for too long. It's not good for you. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. She nodded once. She went down the stairs into the subway without looking back, because she had learned, from a river, from a warehouse floor, from 6 years of building herself from nothing,
that looking back while you were moving forward was how people got lost. The train came. She got on it. Above her, on the pavement, Ethan Cole stood until the sound of it faded completely. Then he took out his phone. Not to call anyone, not to make a decision or issue an instruction or set in motion any of the machinery he had spent 20 years perfecting. He opened the Photos app. He looked at the sailing boat picture, her head thrown back, laughing, the Maine coast behind them, both of them looking accidental and permanent at the same time, for a long moment. Then he put the phone away. He flagged a cab. "Upstate," he told the driver. "Black Pine Lake." He would open the house, let the light in, let it be something other than a monument. She had always been better at knowing what things needed than he was, even now, even at the end of it, especially then.